E pelo lado holandês, gostaria de convidar o Sr. Jorn Konijn, que é curador independente das áreas de arquitetura e design e estudioso do tema Livable Cities.
My name is Jorn Konijn. Eu falo pouquinho português, mas não muito, so I will stick to English if that's okay for you. I'm a curator of architecture and design, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit this morning about the situation in the Netherlands, urban mobility in the Netherlands, bicycle culture in the Netherlands, and most in particularly bicycle identity. First of all, I'd like to thank actually the Dutch consulate for organizing this seminar. I think it's great to discuss this subject here with so many. It's great that the Dutch minister, Wilma Mansveld, is here as well. And great to see so many of you. Let me see where my presentation is. So when I was preparing my presentation, I was thinking a little bit about my own situation in the city where I live, which is the city of Amsterdam. And while I was researching that and making the presentation, I realized that I'm quite lucky actually, and I don't mean to sound very much like the Dutch promotion bureau for the Dutch cyclist units, but I think I'm quite lucky the way we move through the city. So I think more or less the situation where I come from is from ideal urban mobility, focusing on bikes. Here, this is the Netherlands, of course. The city where I live in is Amsterdam. And the neighborhood I live in is Amsterdam South. Here my tiny little street. And the modes of transportation that I only use on a day-to-day basis is simply a bike. And that's what I would say 90% of people living in Amsterdam or living in the big cities do, is use their bike. Their bike to get to work, their bike to get to their family, their friends, etc., etc. So this is also what I do. I don't own a car, I only do things by bike. So if I map out more or less what I do on a day-to-day basis on a bike, it more or less summarizes like this. My office is downtown, so it's roughly 15 minutes, which I think is probably the longest distance I have to travel, is only 15 minutes from my home to work. Now, if I need to go to a different city or to abroad, the nearest train station is actually only 5 minutes cycling. And while I'm there, it's actually great facilities. There's a secured bicycle parking. It's always very full. It's very much like fighting to get your bicycle in there. But it's free and it's secure, so it's actually a very good infrastructure there as well. Now, if I'd like to go to the airport, I take my bike to the station, and from the station to the airport, it's only actually 7 minutes. Here, when I arrived on Monday in Sao Paulo, I think it took me about 2 hours from landing to actually get out of the airport. So it's quite a different situation. And I take the train to other cities like The Hague, it's 30 minutes. To Rotterdam, it's 30 minutes. To Utrecht, it's also 30 minutes. And even if I'd like to go to different countries, Belgium is about 1 hour by train. And Germany is also about 2 hours by train. So it's quite an ideal situation, I would say. But if I look at a little bit more in detail of my neighborhood and look at the accessibility to, for instance, the stores or to culture or to sports, it's also quite ideal. So, for instance, if I have very little money, I can go to a very cheap supermarket. It takes me about 10 minutes. But if I have a little bit more money, I can go to a middle class. It's 2 minutes. Or if I have plenty of money to spend, actually, I go to a very high-end store. It's 3 minutes. So here you see that this type of accessibility is very important when we talk about mobility as well. It's not only about getting from A to B, but it's also about getting from A to B and having the options to go to different types of stores or culture or sports. Let me emphasize that a little bit more, for instance, with sports. This is the old Olympic Stadium. I go to the gym there. It's about 2 minutes, I would say. If I want to go rowing, I'm not really a rowing type, but I can go rowing in about 5 minutes. Here I can play tennis, it's 4 minutes. Here I can play soccer, 5 minutes. So everything is extremely short distance. If I like to see some high culture, I can go to the museum square, I can see both a Rembrandt, I can see a Van Gogh, I can see a Kandinsky in about 10 minutes. So it's all there and it's very easily accessible. I must emphasize that this is quite an ideal situation, so I consider myself quite lucky. Education, I don't have children myself, but there's a kindergarten in about, I would say, 2 minutes. There's a junior high school, elementary school in 2 minutes. There's a high school in about 10. University very nearby. A very good art school, the best one in the Netherlands, actually, also very nearby. And the other issue that I think is quite great in the city where I live in, or at least the neighborhood where I am, it's quite secure. This, for instance, is a small little playground for children right next door, and all the children toys are actually left there outside because nobody steals it anyway, so you don't have to hide it somewhere. So this makes it also very pleasant to live there. And in the case of when I need a car, there's actually right next door, there's a station for this system called Green Wheels. I'm not too sure if you have it in Sao Paulo as well, where you can just share a car with other people. It's quite an easy system to do. So for me, what I'd like to say with this is actually that urban mobility, or good urban mobility, is not only about getting from A to B, not only about getting from A to B in a very high speed or in a very secure way, but it's actually also about accessibility to different types of stores, culture, sports, and the diversity of that. So this is an issue I'd like to raise. Maybe we can discuss it a little bit later. Second thing that I'd like to say is to look at the conditions of how we created this and what type of conditions led to this. So, I mean, part of it is, of course, that Holland is a very small country. It's very short distances in the city. If I, for instance, go from the far east side to my city in Amsterdam to the far west side, I think it's about an hour and a half cycling. So it is easy to do. If I do that here in Sao Paulo, it would take me forever, I would say. Now also the geography. Of course, we're an extremely flat country. If I go cycling here, it's quite difficult, simply because of all the hills and all the geography. And the third thing, I think that's quite good in the Netherlands as well, is that we have a very good infrastructure. Not only about the good bicycle paths, it's all arranged quite good, but also about, for instance, special bike parking. I showed already the bicycle parking before, but this is a sign for special bikes. So these bikes with these large baskets, they actually have their special parking spot in the Netherlands. I think it's quite good. But I think the most important thing that we have in the Netherlands is that we have a true bike culture. And I think it's really deeply rooted in identity. So this is not something created about 5 years ago. It's been there for a very long time. We bike all the time, and we do that always. You see some kids. Here actually the previous one is quite good, because you see we bike, and it doesn't matter when. For instance, when it rains, when it's cold, we simply go out there with the bike, and we just small umbrella. And also when it's hot, we go on bike, get our ice cream. And here you see how deeply rooted it is in our culture, because even our royals, they like to portray themselves as true bike lovers. This is an official reportage where they show themselves to the press, and they show how healthy they are and how sustainable way of living, and true Dutchmen. Here's our prime minister going to work actually in the morning, simply riding his bike. We had, I think 2 weeks ago, we had Barack Obama in Amsterdam. He arrived with about 5 helicopters. And this is our prime minister just arriving with a bike. Yeah. And this is also quite special. I think this is our state secretary for, I think, social affairs. She is disabled. And she still rides a bike, even though she's disabled. She has a driver for her bike. And here you see her getting to work. Here's also a very kind of nationalistic type of way to inspect the troops, very kind of historical way. Our prime minister inspecting the troops in Afghanistan, I believe. And the way he does this on his bike. To become Dutch, to really adapt our identity, you have to do at least one thing, is to learn how to drive a bike. There's a Muslim lady, I think in her inburgeringscursus. I have no way how to translate that to English or to Portuguese, but trying to learn how to ride a bike. And here, even if you're only for 3 or 4 years in the Netherlands, when you're a Brazilian soccer player, you have to learn how to ride a bike. I saw a recent picture of Ronaldo, and I think he should drive a bike a little bit more, because he became quite chubby, I think. Here's another important thing, I think. What you mentioned, Anna Carla, is that the time we use on the bike, if you look at it as pure only getting from A to B, we use our bike actually to do a lot more, to do the multitasking during our bicycle ride. So we work during our bicycle ride, or we even party. This is a notorious a beer bike, so to speak. There's probably only one in the world, in which we cruise through the city. Actually, only very drunk tourists do that. And we party on the bike. So this is something that I'd like to raise, is that it's very important also for municipalities not only to think of infrastructure or not only to think of security when you talk about bike culture, but very much about how to program bike culture, how to support this. And I think it's not only important to get people on their bikes, but it's also very important to for people to realize, other participants in the traffic, that there's a lot of bicycles out there. Because I think a lot of car owners, a lot of motoristas, a lot of bus, they're simply not used to very much here of people on their bikes. So I'm from the field of architecture and design. I wanted to conclude with showing a few examples of what architects, Dutch architects and some international architects and designers work on in terms of the bike. So here you see that, again, we try to relate a lot towards our bike. Even when we do the design of an umbrella, we relate it to our bike. How do you use this umbrella on your bike? Here you see a bike with a picnic set, if you go to the park. And the picnic set is designed in a way that it could easily fit the bike. Here you see, actually, for a long time, for designers and architects, it was not very common to work on the design of bikes anymore, because it was considered basically a product that was more or less, over-designed or finished in terms of kind of completed design. But you see more and more young designers working on new types of bikes. This is, for instance, a very sustainable wooden bike by a Dutch designer. Here you see a nice example of a so-called growing bike. So you don't have to buy a new bike every years, but you can use this bike for a kid when he's 6, when he's 8, when he's 10, etc. Here you see architects and designers trying to combine different types of functions. So for instance, the furniture to store your bike, but also just a bench in a park or in a city somewhere. Here you see a plan from an underground biking parking. I think this is quite maybe a little bit out there. I think it's also from Japan, but large underground bicycle parking to facilitate bicycle culture. This, maybe some of you have noticed or seen, it's a plan by star architect Norman Foster. It's a bit like the Mignon Cow, indeed. But it's quite interesting to see such a star architect as Foster, who I think travels by helicopter or by a huge limousine. He devised a plan for the city of London. There's a lot of casualties in bicycle traffic these days in London. So to make like an elevador for only for bikes. I think it's quite outrageous. And this is actually the last slide I wanted to show. It's a very nice kind of small university place done by a Dutch architect called NL Architects. They made it for China, which is also, of course, very typical bicycle culture and losing their bicycle culture. So they try to kind of bring that bicycle culture back by this design. I think it's very nice. And this was more or less my last slide. I'd like to maybe put a little bit a statement out there to the policymakers here. Please involve architects and designers much more in your plans, because I think they have a lot of creativity to bring to the table. Muito obrigado. Thank you.